Hello. So we're here to do a Pootle demo. This is streaming live now, and we're going to figure out how to get Dwayne on here momentarily. Hello. So we're here to do a Pootle demo. This is streaming live now, and we're going to figure out how to get Dwayne on here momentarily.
Hey, I've got some people. It's
Hey,
great.
welcome.
Finally. I thought this was meant to be really easy. Thanks for your patience.
No problem.
So let me jump in quite quickly. I'm just going to figure out how to share my screen. So I think let me start by giving just a quick backstory on Pootle before I do some demos. And I'm going to demo firstly from a user perspective, and then try to do an admin setup, and I'll try to do it on the OpenStack server. So Pootle itself was developed by initially by a non-profit, so the code is owned by a non-profit, and it's GPL'd. The main aim for developing it was to assist in community localization. So we use the term community as in not just crowdsourced localization. I think our main aim is to get the communities that use the software being localized to actually be the localizers, and that's how I am when we deploy the server for clients. In terms of people who are actively using Pootle at the moment, that includes LibreOffice and Mozilla and Evernote and a whole lot of other people that we might or might not know about. Yeah, just because people can deploy it. The motivation in terms of why we develop Pootle, our background is localization and community localization, and we're trying to apply the best practices for localization to communities. And I think sometimes we get that right, and maybe sometimes we don't. But our main aim is is to try apply the best practices from commercial localization and apply that to the community. The active developers at the moment are ourselves, Translate. Evernote develops it as well, and then we have community contributions. So that's a quick backstory on it, and then let me jump straight into a demo. So what we're demoing is let me just get the right screen. Okay. So this is our version 2.6.0. So the current version that's released is 2.5.1, but we've had quite a radical change in the user interface as well as in the way things operate. So in terms of anyone deploying Pootle now, we're moving them towards 2.6.0 because that will be what they deploy. So from a user perspective, the first thing to look at is how people get around and navigate. So this is an overview of, so this is actually a demo installation of our Mozilla localization server. So we were just using this to test the Mozilla site. So this is actually all the data from about 2 weeks ago. So it's a pretty big setup in terms of users and projects, and it's got a lot of data in it, but it's not being translated on actively at the moment. So it's just a demo. The first view for us is people can see all the projects that are hosted on the site. Usually, as a user, it'll do some language detection and take me straight to the projects or the language that I'm working on. So I speak Afrikaans as a second language, so this is usually the view that I would get. We try to expose all the data that a translator needs to take the next action and emphasize that. So they're seeing all their active projects. So they've got Firefox, Firefox Health Report, Firefox OS, Firefox OS 1.4. They can see the level of completion for their work. This is the total number of words that need to be translated. And we use words instead of strings just because that kind of reflects commercial localization and gives a much better idea of the volume of work to be done. It can be more discouraging though if you're looking at 11,000 words that need translation, but you're probably only looking at about 6,000 or 7,000 strings. And then we track suggestions from the community, so someone who doesn't have translate rights can make a suggestion, and then we look at errors that we pick up that need to be fixed. So if I was going to be translating this, I would jump straight in. I want to translate Firefox OS. If I click on this lozenge with 456, it will take me directly to translating. And then I've got a view of, I can step through translations, and I'll come back to that. I can go back to my overview, and I'm back where I was. Let me drill down into the actual Firefox OS project. And here I've got the same view. You can see the number of translations, the number of suggestions that I need to review, and the number of errors. But I can also filter at this level now. So I can filter by directories within a project and see those. So some of this depends on the structure of projects that you'd be localizing in OpenStack, whether they've got a single file or multiple files. But this would be a project that's got multiple files. So it's pretty easy to navigate, and you change between projects like this. So we're now looking at a different project, Firefox version 33. Let me jump to another project, and it's as simple as that to jump between projects. And so you'll notice that this top part is quite consistent, whether we translate, whether we're navigating, or whether we're translating. So let's jump into our translations, and I'll give you an overview of what we're seeing here. So when we're translating, we always have an idea of where we're located. So you can see the path for this file. And our main aim here is to expose as much information as we can to allow translators to make decisions about what needs to be translated. So we've always got
quick question. Daisy had a question in the chat there. What file formats are supported?
We do PO and XLIF as our main file formats, but basically anything that's supported in the Translate toolkit. So we've got, let me just quickly look at our list. If you look here, we'll support mostly bilingual file formats, so gettext, qtlinguist, tmx, tbx, zilla.lang. And I kind of encourage people to focus on bilingual file formats. So that's like there's a source and target. We can handle monolingual file formats, but I don't use them on any of the projects that I work with. So with Mozilla, I convert files to PO and work with that. But essentially, any file format that's supported in the Translate toolkit, Pootle can handle. Does that answer the question? So let me jump back to just the translation interface. Our main aim here is to try to present all the information that's needed at once without having too many clicks to expose other things. So we've got the language, and the reason why we've got the language is you can step through translation files across all languages. You've got the project, you've got the URL to the file that you're translating, and you've got the current string that you're translating. That's a clickable link so that users can share it if you need to have some discussion about a specific string. We take the locations from PO whatever and display those. It says English here because we can also display what we call an alternate source language. So if someone's mother tongue is not English and they're translating from, for example, Spanish into a native South American language, they can use Spanish as a second language, and we'll pick up the Spanish to allow people to view other languages. So it just gives you an idea of how other people have translated, or if you don't speak English, it allows you to translate from that language. Submitting a translation is pretty easy. Don't know what happened there. So let's translation, and also
Oh, looks like we lost him.
jump in quite quickly. I'm just going to I don't know how to share my screen. Hello. Can anyone tell me when exactly they lost me?
Let's see.
Did I show you translation memory?
I don't think so.
Oh dear. That far back. And the translation interface itself?
Yes, I think so. We had started looking at that. I think you had just explained that you can. The source is English, but you can change the source to different things if needed.
Okay, the alternate source language.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's jump back. I might repeat myself a bit.
No worries. And do you have the group chat thing on the side of your screen? I just typed in it.
Yeah, let me try to give myself some space. I can see that. Everything covered with my screen share. Cool, let me look at. It might be easier for me to catch questions as well. Let me just find a unit quick and then I'll chat to that question. The stuff on the left being this area here. Daisy. Okay, so just looking quickly at the interface, in the center is everything to do with the translation. Top right.
Can you share your screen again?
Oh, is it not shared?
Thanks.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so everything in the center is to do with the translation itself. The top being the source language and an alternate source language. Translation memory. The stuff on the left is any auxiliary information that we know about this unit. So location information from PO files, comments, and those would be comments. These would be translator comments. At least not translator comments, developer comments, so comments that are inside the source. And then terminology that we see here is coming from a terminology project hosted on the Pootle server that would give suggestions related to that unit. So obviously here it's suggesting the terminology for Bluetooth. So all of that information is coming directly from the file format itself. So if a properties file has that information, then we display that. If the PO file's got that information, then we display it. Jump back. Yeah, I'm not sure if I showed the timeline, but let me just generate some timeline information. So this translation is actually correct. And I'm gonna use the size on my screen again. Yeah. Submit a few translations. Same unit. So with any unit, we should be able to see a timeline of changes that were made. This started with the system user uploading a string. So it's when this project was first loaded into Pootle. I changed the state of the unit. I translated it one way and then translated it back again. So you should see that together with the user who made those changes. As well as doing that, I can so the history for that string is shown in the timeline. There's a list of keyboard shortcuts at the top there. Keyboard shortcuts are always going to be a problem. We struggle a bit because of the conflict with system keys and browser keys. But we've tried our best to select a number of keys that allow you to navigate between placeables and between strings and to submit strings without having to use a mouse. Let me just jump to the overview. So in the overview again, we've got the translations that need to be done, and as well as other things that need action. So obviously the priorities are getting the translations complete, but also we allow the community to make suggestions. So someone who doesn't have translation rights might have suggestion rights, so they can we can then go and review their suggestions. So I made a suggestion here, which I want to reject, and another user made a suggestion, but I myself can make a suggestion, and I just can change the submission button from a submission to actually submit a translation or to make a suggestion. So I will and if we return to that suggestion, you can see the suggestion that I made, and we have some diff markup to show what changed. Let's just jump to the search function. The question about that. I'll go to the whole search within the source text or the target text or a comment or a location, and this should allow me to step through the translations and that have the word file, and the interface then behaves exactly the same. If I submit a string, it'll go to the next entry in the search, and I can step through like that. We looked at suggestions. Then we just look through errors. So we pick up errors. Here we're picking up an error which is actually a false positive in that we're using time markup. So I'll just try to find some proper placeable errors. Okay, these work. So over here we've got the units in red because they're errors that have occurred, and you can see our list of errors on the right. And I can fix this one by adding the placeable that's missing. And if I go back to that unit, all the errors have disappeared. If we look at this one, you'll see that the placeable is highlighted in red, and if we hover over it, it turns green. and those are all clickable, so you can insert a placeable wherever your cursor is, and you should be able to have autocomplete as well for placeable, so that just helps reduce potential errors of mistyping variables that are named variables. Placeables works for things like new lines, other things like camel case. Let's find a unit with, here's a unit with HTML markup, and we can pick up those placeables as well. I'm just looking at this question. Are there roles from management to translators and reviewers? So if I go back to the admin interface, at least the project interface, so at a project level and also at a language level, you can manage permissions for various users. So we don't have concepts of teams. We manage individual users, but we can define those rights at a language level. And this is a list of the rights that people can have. They can administer a project, and so that would essentially mean they can give and take away rights to various users. They can download the whole project. If there's version control, they can commit to version control. If they upload, they can overwrite files. So that's a right we give because it's a destructive thing. Review translations is that they can actually step through and review suggestions made by other users. They can make suggestions, so that's the right that you'd want to give to someone who can make suggestions or to give to the broader community, and then they can actually translate. So that's the level of rights that we can give to people. The last thing I wanted to look at, because I don't think we covered it, was translation memory. So this comes at the bottom, and it, essentially if you clicked on it, you can choose an entry from translation memory. So that will overwrite the existing translation in the window and allow you to then edit it if you need to. And those translation memory suggestions come from a server that we host that contains all of the open source, or all of the big open source project translations. So things like LibreOffice, Mozilla, KDE, GNOME, and a few others that we host. And it just allows consistency of translation across all the projects in the open source community without having to actually host them on your instance of Pootle. I'm just clicking on this one because it pulls in, it's pulling in translation memory suggestions from this instance of Pootle. So in this case, we actually know which project it comes from, so it's Firefox OS, and a suggestion made by myself. So that gives you some idea of the metrics to be able to evaluate, do I trust this person, is it coming from, which project is it coming from, etc. So there are two sources of translation memory. One is our server, which we update relatively regularly, but we mostly focused on stable releases of software. So we're not interested in the currently in development versions of GNOME. We're interested in the released versions. So we'll host those translations. In terms of translations that we host there, we host anything that's relatively easy to pull in. But in an OpenStack scenario, you'd be getting the translation memory from the translations that are happening on the server, in addition to the ones from our external server. So the external server just allows you to get access to much wider translation memory without having to manage it. Then let's just jump out of the translation view for a quick bit. So we also have a sidebar which contains a list of actions that a translator can perform on the project, and that will depend on the rights that they have. But probably more important are these sets of instructions. So these can be defined by anyone setting up a project and can be changed. So I should be able to edit these, but I'm not sure why not. But I should be able to edit those, and I can change the instructions. And if those instructions change, there we go. Then the sidebar will pop out again. So it's quite a convenient way to communicate new information to translators on that project. And let me just quickly jump into Firefox for Afrikaans. So at the bottom here, you'll see on the Mozilla server we've got some custom actions. So there is the possibility to write code to generate your own action that a translator could execute. So that's it from the translation interface, the navigating, etc. I'm going to do a quick setup of a project from the UI. Mostly I set up my projects partially from the UI, but also from the command line on the servers that I manage. I'm not sure what kind of scenario OpenStack needs, if there's access to the command line, or if it needs to all be through the UI.
I think we'll be automating a lot of it through the command line.
Okay, brilliant. So let me show you what I do. What I'll do quickly on the UI. Let me do it on. Let me try to do it on your server. Name. So over here I'm setting up the project code, which is essentially from the command line. It's just the directory that that hosts those files. Name. The quality checks are the checks that you saw. There are various styles and types that we have defined. Defining new ones is relatively easy, and defining language-specific ones is relatively easy. So I'll leave that as standard. Defining the file types that the project's going to host, so we'll use PO, and defining the style of the layout. So new style is the classic. We have one POT file, and we've got language codes for each translation file. The non-GNU, which I'll choose in this instance, is the case where each language is in a separate directory. Okay, so we've defined a project. I'm going to add a template language. And I'm going to upload a POT file. I think it might be this one. suspect we're hitting some issues. Yeah, I think we're hitting some issues on that server.
We haven't actually uploaded anything yet, so it could be.
I think it might
there are
be
some issues.
file system permissions. Okay, not a problem. Let me look at the one that I created on the server, I think. Yeah, so I created a similar one. Okay, so I created a similar one just before the call. So here I've added 2 languages already. It's quite simple to add new languages. Like I'll drop into the language side and add Amharic. And this is a bug, but let me just rescan that. Yeah, so we've got an overview of all the translations, and we could jump into Amharic and begin to translate. Let's translate some words that are likely to be available. Got it lost. Okay. And you can see that the translation count for Amharic's gone down by the two words that I translated. From a command line, the equivalent command line commands like we're using Django, so it's simple commands to sync stores, so that will export them out of Pootle, or update stores, so that will upload them from the file system. And that's mostly how we manage things. And on my side, for the Mozilla things, I write scripts that do any transformation and upload files. And it's possible from the scripting side to manage it quite tightly. So before you run scripts, you can get a stamp. So we kind of count translations that have been submitted. So you can get some counts, like what we call a I forget what we call it now, but it gives us a numeric stamp of exactly where Pootle was. You can do any processing, submit or update files, and make sure that you don't overwrite anything that was changed after that timestamp. So it's possible for us to do offline processing, push files up, and know that while people were translating on the server, we're not going to overwrite any of their translations. So it's possible to do a lot of the processing in the background while keeping the server up and running. I think that covers a lot of the stuff. I'll just do a quick run through. So this admin UI is going to change quite radically, but this is the kind of global admin. We've got access to all of the users, to reset passwords, to give them, to activate them if they didn't activate. This is a bit unwieldy to use at the moment, but that it will change quite radically for the next release. Any of the languages that we need to define, we can define here. Their codes, their names, etc. All the projects, so we saw that already when I defined the test project, but any new project we can define here. These are global permissions. So what we're seeing here is that the user nobody, which I always get confused with these, user nobody is someone who's not logged in. So our kind of default behavior is to, because of spam we've had in the past, is that someone who hasn't bothered to log in or have a user can view a project but can't make suggestions. And then the default user is someone who's logged in. What is the default they get across the whole site? So that would depend on how you trust people. If you trust them to not submit translations in languages that they don't understand. But a global suggestion right is probably the most useful. Just in terms of Fatal, you can't. And so Fatal will only do. So for those who don't know, Fatal is a desktop translation tool that we also develop. So it has similar aims in terms of the UI, trying to make it very uncluttered and all the information that you need is available. But it can't be used to manage a Pootle instance. So you can't add projects or create projects. What Fatal can do is if you were downloading files, you could download it, translate it in Fatal, and upload again. We have a number of, certainly with Mozilla, a number of African language translators who do that, mostly because the internet is still too slow for a rich UI in places like Africa and India. In certain instances, so people will prefer to use offline translation. So I think so that's the admin side that I just wanted to wrap up. And then from our side, just in terms of what we're focused on in terms of Pootle, we're trying to get 2.6.0 out, obviously, and that's our current focus. There's a big redesign and effort on the admin interfaces that I've just shown you, which will make it much easier to use. But that only impacts a few people who are admiring Pootle in the background. Our next big push won't see a lot of UI changes or feature changes, but just a lot of code cleanup around how we handle files and version control. So depending on what how OpenStack wants to integrate on the back end, that might or might not impact on what you would want to do. But I think that's a wrap up from me. If there are any other questions. So I think that's the UI side. I can demo stuff quickly if people have got other questions.
I don't have anything right now. I think on our end we'll try to get our Pootle fixed. I'm not sure what's going wrong with it, but it's still got a little loading thing going on. So I think we'll fix this and upload some projects and have people start playing with it.
Okay,
and then we can let you know if we have other questions, unless Daisy has anything else right now.
And I'm on the end of emails, so any questions that come up that people have afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. What is the USP of Pootle?
Dwen, what is USP of Pootle? If you supposed to compete with Transifex and Janata, what do you think? What is the unique selling point for Pootle?
I mean, compared to some of the others.
Yes, yes. If we want to compare Pootle with Janata and Transifex, what is the unique thing? The best thing you want to say that this is the best thing over the others?
That's interesting. Well, primarily, which would eliminate some of the things, is our focus is on being an open source project. So all our code is open source. It's not going to become not open source. We actually legally can't make the project proprietary. So that's one of our primary things. Our second thing for us is that our primary focus is on community localization. So it's harnessing the best of commercial localization. So we have commercial localization partners who use Pootle, and integrating those into a platform that still remains simple and intuitive to use. So that's our primary focus, or our unique selling point, is that we're people passionate about localization and understand commercial localization, and trying to transfer that into the domain of community localization to make community localizers the best that they can be without them having to know anything about the buzzwords. So you'll notice on the UI we don't actually talk about translation memory, and we don't use any of those buzzwords that require you to be to have knowledge of localization. We just call them, I think we call them, I've forgotten what we even call them, previous translations or something similar. So that's our selling point, is that we're passionate localizers focused on making community localizers the best that they can be.
Thank you, Duane. Thanks.
Daisy, statistics. Let me show you what we've got. So just in terms of stats, let me try get to me. So at the moment, this is the contributor stats that we do have for users. This will probably change.
We don't have your screen.
Thank you. That screen. So this is contributor stats for myself on this project, looking at all of the submissions and suggestions that I have given to the various projects. So that's the best we have now in terms of individual contributions. And then as an overall pages, hopefully it renders quickly. But this is contributions by everyone on the server for the various projects. So we use the best data we can for them and the projects that they contribute to. But we don't have anything at the moment in terms of graphs or any kind of fine-grained drilling down into data. Overall view for all translators. I think it's this page would be our overall view. API for translator contributions. We have an API. But I'm not quite sure if it's going to give you the data that you need. So we've got this API. So within that API, we can basically achieve what's needed. Get lists of translation projects and stats based on stores. But I'm not sure how much work it would be to create a kind of custom overview for OpenStack. Great. No other questions? I think that's it then. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for your time and for the opportunity to pose another question. So let me answer that quickly. Could you show us how terminology works? Yep. Let me look at that quickly. Let's go to one that's got terminology. So there are two places where we can create terminology. The first is a project specifically called terminology. So as long as there's a terminology project on a Pootle instance, a user can upload any file to this project. So you could, we've hosted things like the data from fuel. You could host TMX files or TBX files, or convert spreadsheets, or do anything. So as long as we've got a format that Pootle understands and source target pairs, we can use that file. And then it's just, it's quite simply a list of strings that are source and target. So a lot of these ones are fuzzy, but you can see the idea. So it would be possible to, for instance, create a core OpenStack terminology list, to host it there, to either host the various projects in this one terminology project. And what happens is, as soon as there is a word defined there, let's actually try. So now if we go into, actually this is fine. So if we look at this now, these words are actually in the terminology project. They probably shouldn't be. And we try to do guesses and matches. So obviously here it's not doing a very good guessing, because it's seeing port as part of report. So anywhere where it finds the word that also occurs in our terminology list, it will use that. So that's the first way that we can use terminology. The second way, which works, but I would tend to discourage it, is let's try to find a project that's done it this way. Not that one. It's going to be on the server. I'll show you on the current live instance of. So this is a live instance of the Mozilla project. It's still got the old user interface. Okay. So I'm going to jump back and see if we've got it. So we did have it. So the second option is if you upload a file called Pootle terminology to any project, that will be used for terminology as well. So it's possible to do a custom terminology list for a specific project, as long as there's that file in the base directory. But I would discourage doing that and rather look at a consolidated terminology project. So I think that, yeah, I think that covers terminology. Okay. If there are no other questions, I think we can wrap it up then. Great.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.